All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second of the Great Salt Lake Collaborative's series of panel discussions. My name is Ben Winslow. I'm a political reporter for Fox 13 News. My station is one of 23 different news and educational institutions that are partnering together as part of the Great Salt Lake Collaborative to cover issues facing the Great Salt Lake as well as exploring potential solutions to save it. This is a unique venture for us in the news media. We're used to competing with each other a lot, and on this particular subject, we're actually working together. For example, I recently went on a trip to Las Vegas with Utah Public Radio in Logan and the Salt Lake Tribune to look at water conservation measures there, and that's reporting that you'll be seeing rolled out and published and broadcast in the next little bit here. The Great Salt Lake Collaborative was formed thanks to a grant from the Solutions Journalism Network, and the goal of Solutions Journalism is to not just talk about issues, but explore potential solutions that may be able to help. Beyond the newsrooms, you have community organizations like the Salt Lake City Public Library, who has graciously donated space here tonight, where we can host community events like this. And tonight, we are addressing a critical question that is, of course, on everyone's mind, which is, can the Great Salt Lake be saved? I was recently out at the Great Salt Lake Marina doing a story, and I gotta tell you, it's not looking good. It's looking really bad. It has no water in it. The marina they've pulled the boats out. The measurement gauge by the U.S. Geological Survey, which has been used there for over 100 years, no longer works. The lake levels are that low. They're talking about emergency channels so that search and rescue can just get out into the lake if something happens. Tonight we are joined by three leading voices on the lake. I'll ask each to raise your hands. Linda Freitas is the executive director of Friends of Great Salt Lake. She has been a champion of the lake for many, many years and policies to protect it. Lynn joined the board shortly after Friends of Great Salt Lake was founded back in 1994, and she's now their executive director. She's received a number of awards for her environmental work and helped to draft language of House Concurrent Resolution 10 that started to call attention to policies to protect the lake and served on Governor Gary Herbert's Water Strategy Advisory Team. House Speaker Brad Wilson represents the Fighting 15th District in Kaysville. A home builder by profession, he has served as Speaker of the House since 2019, pushing policies on tax cuts and modernizing education. He's also pushed bills for water conservation and saving the Great Salt Lake, including a record $40 million funding allocation this year with the goal of getting water into the lake. And I've said it before on TV, and I will say it again here for all of you. The Great Salt Lake is literally his biggest constituent, at least when it comes in terms of geographic size. Dr. Sarah Null is an associate professor at Utah State University's Watershed Sciences Department. She specializes in environmental water management, climate adaptation, water quality, and aquatic habitat. Among her research examinations, monitoring and modeling managed environmental water for maximum environmental benefit, predicting climate change effects on hydrology, water quality, and aquatic habitat to anticipate change and identify promising adaptation strategies. So welcome to all of you. After all of that introductions, let's get right to the question at hand. Is it too late to save the Great Salt Lake? As I mentioned, it is not looking good right now. And Speaker Wilson, I'd like to start with you. Is it too late?
Well, thanks, Ben. And thank you all for being here tonight. I've never been in this facility, and it's good to see people are interested and engaged in the issues of the day. I absolutely think that not only can we, but we must save the Great Salt Lake, and that's I think we all share that opinion up here. And it's actually not necessarily because the Great Salt Lake is in my district that I care about the Great Salt Lake. That's just a fortunate coincidence. But I did grow up in Utah. I did grow up spending time in, on, and around the lake. And it's a big part of not just who we are from an environmental standpoint, but it's just who we are. I mean, our capital city is named after the lake. And it plays important roles in everything we do, from our economy, more importantly to our lifestyle and our environment. And we all know the reasons why it matters. I will say, just to be really frank, this is all going to stay in the room, right?
Except for the internet.
Except for the media and the internet and all that. But in some ways, I feel like I'm a little late to the party. I mean, Lynn's been at this party since I graduated from college that year. You joined the Friends of the Great Salt Lake, and I think that to some extent, policymakers have had their attention on other things for the last 20 years, and important things. But the Great Salt Lake is not something that until recently has had the attention that it's probably needed. And I remember vividly about a year and a half or so ago when I was thinking about the big issues, and I literally every day tonight, well, it won't be light when I drive home, but every day when I drive home to West Kaysville, as I come and come off the freeway and head west, I see Antelope Island and I see the lake. And it had not been lost on me that it was getting harder and harder to see. And I was listening to a public radio podcast about a year and a half ago about Owens Lake. And many of you know about Owens Lake. We can talk about it if you want, but we're here to talk about the Great Salt Lake. And I thought, wow, I mean, that is not just scary, it's terrifying. And we've got to do something about this. And I called my chief of staff and I said, we need to lean heavy and hard into the Great Salt Lake. And so we've done that over the last year and a half, and it's been remarkable to see what's happened and what we've quite frankly been able to do in a very short period of time once we got people's attention focused on it. And but what's even more remarkable to me is, and I'm not filibustering, Ben, I promise, but what's been more remarkable to me has been what the public has been able to accomplish over the last year. And we've actually seen, and it's why I'm so optimistic about the Great Salt Lake, even though right now it's not in a good spot, is Utahns have done what they do remarkably well. They've risen to the occasion. They've conserved water in ways that's just remarkable this year. And because of that, we're sending 30,000 acre feet that wasn't planned down to the Great Salt Lake this year, and hopefully that's just the beginning. So, and that's kind of a drop in the bucket, but it's more than a drop. It's a couple drops in the bucket, but it's a move in the right direction. So,
Lynn, can the lake be saved, or have we passed a point of no return?
Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. The lake can be saved. It is our stewardship responsibility on behalf of this hemispherically significant ecosystem that not only do we rely on Great Salt Lake for the values that it provides for us, mineral extraction, brine shrimp harvesting and aquaculture, recreation and tourism, certainly the important habitat for millions of migratory birds, but hemispherically, it is a key stopping, staging, resting, nesting place for over 10 million migratory birds. 338 different species of birds rely on the lake. And the lake is really a foundational reference point of who we are, how we are, and our history and culture and the science that we reap the benefit from this system. So we, as the stewards, and having the responsibility to work on behalf of this public trust resource that belongs to all of us, that the state of Utah, in the Utah Constitution, is mandated to manage responsibly and sustainably for the people of Utah as a public trust resource. So we're all in this together, and a part of it that we need to own up to is our participation, but also become better educated about the issues so we can reach out and share Great Salt Lake awareness with our neighbors and with our cohort and with our colleagues, because it will take all of us. And I love the company of being a fast friend with Speaker Wilson and, the amazing scientific insights that we learn from people like Sarah Null and her cohort. So it's a very rich opportunity, but it will take time and it will take commitment. But I believe we can save the lake.
Dr. Null, from your perspective, can the lake be saved?
Yes, the lake can be saved, and that's great news for Utah. It's great news for Utahns. I will caution that I think it'll take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. It didn't drop overnight, and we're not going to get back to a healthy range in 1 year, but we can do it. The legislature has been changing some water code to pave the way to make it possible. So water that goes to Great Salt Lake is a beneficial use of water, where we have more market solutions where we could trade water to reallocate water. So we have a lot of tools to use now, and we need to use them. And in saving the Great Salt Lake, I really think we have to. Our human health, depends on it. Where 4 million Utahns live along the Wasatch Front, and so we don't want to have dust storms and live in the shadow of dust storms. We want to keep Utah a great place with tourism, with people who want to come here. And that means making some real changes. Changes are hard, but we can do them. When I've been at Utah State University this is my 12th year, and when I flew in, when my plane was landing on my interview coming here, I knew I wanted to study Great Salt Lake. It's one of those things I thought, if I get this job, I'm going to start working on Great Salt Lake. And it had been declining a little bit, but in 2011, it wasn't so low as it is now. And so in the time that I've been here, it's become essential that we have to care about Great Salt Lake. We have to make changes. Those changes will be hard. Thinking about decadal changes, that's where I really think of policymakers. And that's real, it's hard. There's not, do this one thing and we'll get there. But we can do it. And I'm pleased to see so many people in this room who came out because you care about Great Salt Lake.
So let me ask then, because the lake is not filling up, and what specifically should we be doing? And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Null. What should we be doing?
Well, the most important thing is we need to start bringing water to Great Salt Lake. And so there are a number of ways to do that. And I think that none should be taken off the table. I think we should be looking at all of these approaches. So some really promising ones are water conservation. Utahns use a lot of water. We're the second highest water use per person in the United States, even though we're the second driest state in the nation. But what that tells me is that there's a lot of opportunities for conservation. And when I say this, I mean urban, I mean industrial, I mean agriculture. All of us should be trying to conserve water. That's why Great Salt Lake is so low, is because we take water from streams, we divert it away, and it's consumptively used by the environment, by people. And so we know we need to start bringing water back. I mentioned water banking. That's a really nice way to reallocate some water. If nothing else, we should look at maintaining, basically, saying some of this water has to go to Great Salt Lake, more of a regulatory approach. And again, because I think the health and safety of Utahns is the most important use for water.
Speaker Wilson, what specifically do you think needs to be done?
Thanks, Ben. Well, the first thing we need to do, there's a lot of things, right? But this last year, the legislature, the state, invested close to $500 million in water. All of that, quite frankly, was because of the Great Salt Lake. And so the first important thing we need to do is execute on the efforts we've already put in place. And just at a super high level, that money is broken down into secondary water metering, the water trust you talked about, agriculture optimization, which, let me just pause on that. What that means is we all hear, and it's true, that agriculture is the largest user of water in the state. And agriculture owns that water. The way water is structured in the state of Utah is people that own the water have water rights to it. But the agricultural community has this opportunity, and Dr. Null talked about it, to help us with conservation. And so one of the efforts we invested about $75 million in last year is a grant program for agriculture to take and use new technology that reduces their consumption by around 30%. And that's big water. If everyone in agriculture optimizes their use, we save a lot of water that could go to the lake. The challenge is, well, the good news first. The good news is agriculture has been remarkable. For every dollar the state put in, of that $75 million, agriculture put in about $4 for every dollar we put in. And so they're making a big commitment themselves in helping us conserve water. But we've probably, with that $75 million, and don't hold me to this, we've maybe touched 5% of agriculture in the state. So you can see the magnitude of how much money we will need to invest as a state to optimize our agricultural use over the next decade. And not everyone in agriculture can do it right away, but kind of building off of this theme of we need to continue doing more of what we've done. Up there, where I spend way too much time this coming session, we need a massive investment in agricultural optimization. So we can continue to make progress in that regard. And when you think about the Pareto principle, the biggest user of water, making a big investment to help them reduce water, that's where one of those opportunities is. And then just, continuing to do conservation efforts like Dr. Null's talked about. That's where the big opportunities are right now.
Lynn, thoughts? What needs to be done?
So we have a growing population that is projected to double by 2060 to about 5 million people. Will be the size of Philadelphia along the shores of Great Salt Lake. Most of the growth will happen in the northern part of the state. With that, there needs to be an education of our citizens to know that, for instance, 60% of water use is out of doors, on lawns, on grass. And there are practical and obvious ways where we can reduce that water use. Certainly, the way we have innovative systems in our homes to, be more practical and conservation-minded in the water that is a part of our daily use. But I think each of us needs to be mindful of what we can do to reduce our water use. It just seems like, when Speaker Wilson was talking about agriculture, and admittedly, I have 2 horses, so they like alfalfa. But I do advocate to everyone that agriculture is a part of the solution and is a partner that can demonstrate to perhaps some entities that are a little more timid about stepping up and committing, that agriculture can really be a part of changing the paradigm. Because, first in time, first in right. They were here early on during the early settlement of Utah, and the Utah water law basically acknowledges the fact that because they were here first in time, the rights of the water that they had access to for ranching and farming were a part of, continuing with that commitment that they made on the landscape. But again, revisions have been made through legislative tools that have helped the state engineer recognize opportunities for acknowledging water coming to the lake as a beneficial use, which historically, this is phenomenal because water going to Great Salt Lake has never been considered useful. It's always been characterized as being wasteful. Great Salt Lake has been thought of for so long as a dead sea. Stinky, buggy, salty, dead sea. But we know differently now. And so a part of that is, okay, how can we, under the shrink wrap of climate change and a mega drought and a growing population and the second driest state in the nation, how can we actively demonstrate, productive, durable water behavior to include Great Salt Lake in that conversation?
Lynn, you touched on this, and I kind of want to expand on that. We are one of the fastest growing states, if not the fastest growing state in the nation. So how can you balance the demands of everybody? People need water. We've got a lot of businesses. We've got a lot of things that we have a lot of needs for water. How can you balance the demands of everybody, but ensure that the Great Salt Lake continues to get water? I kind of want to throw this out there. I'd like to start with you, Speaker. How do you balance all of this?
I was going to throw it to you, too.
I thought you were asking Lynn. I was excited to hear her answer. So, well, it's not easy, right? And that's one of the things we're struggling with right now. I mean, Lynn talks about the growth in terms of doubling in size. Well, there's a little bit of an asterisk tied to that, and that is if we have the water. And we may not have the water to do that. And, I feel part of my job is to make sure we do, because that's an important part. I mean, I want my kids to live nearby and my grandkids to live nearby, and maybe I'm part of the problem, but I love this state, and I want my family to be here. So we're going to have to pull all these levers that we've talked about so that we have additional water, or well, not additional water, we're using our water differently so that people can still live here. And really, I mean, I don't want to be too repetitive, but there's no silver bullet out there. There's nothing that we can do magically that's going to solve this problem. It's these fundamental things that we've already talked about. Conservation, primarily, and really just rethinking the way we use water. I mean, it's crazy, and you both talked about it, but it is crazy up until recently. If you are in agriculture and you had water rights, I literally had this conversation with someone a year ago, and if he didn't, prior to us changing the law, if he didn't water his field that he wasn't growing anything on, he would lose his water. So that water was just, being put on a dry field, and a lot of it was just going into the atmosphere. So we fixed that, but we've got to, and I've said this, I don't know if I said it with Lynn around, but the Great Salt Lake, up until recently, at Thanksgiving dinner, was at the little kids' table, and we need to put it at the big kids' table. And when we do that, it starts to have a seat at the table where it matters, and we're paying attention to it. And as long as we're doing that and tending to its needs, we will be able to grow. But we can't grow if we're not taking care of our basic needs in the lake. So,
Lynn, I was going to say,
I would just add that the cost of water, I think, I don't know that people actually acknowledge how much water is valued. And it's kind of hidden in our property taxes. And I think that with all due respects to the range of population needs, we need to think about recognizing the cost of water and make it a conscious recognition that can help change behavior as far as using less, and having incentives to do that. So, carrot and sticks, but carrots are good, and sticks are if necessary.
Dr. Null, how do you balance those needs? I like to have water when I turn on my faucet. Yeah. People are moving here. But how do you also save the lake at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, there's not easy solutions. Again, that comes back to some growing pains and us having to get there. I certainly think understanding the value of water helps, because it helps us to be able to reallocate water when that makes sense, so that farmers might say, I'm going to have 2 cuttings of alfalfa this year and sell the water that I used to grow a 3rd cutting with. And that makes sense to me. I can stay whole economically. Sometimes cities might purchase that water. Sometimes the state might purchase that water to bring it down to Great Salt Lake. And so that kind of flexibility is really, really important. And one more point that I should mention that I think we should have when we were talking about conservation is conservation is so important. All of these tools or knobs that we can turn are important, but we also need to make sure that the water that we conserve makes it down to Great Salt Lake. And right now that's not very clear, and we do have a seniority-based system. And so people can conserve water, and the next senior or the next junior water right holder can take it. And so we need to be able, so when people, cities, farmers, anyone conserves water, that they can earmark it. And that's probably going to be a role where the state can help. More measurements, more monitoring, that can also help. So we can know, we can track how much water is in rivers and be confident that if somebody conserves water and has, say, one less cutting of alfalfa, that they know that water is actually going to get to Great Salt Lake.
I just want to jump in if I can and build on this, and maybe it's too repetitive, but last month I traveled with Governor Cox to Israel, and it was on a trade mission, but I went specifically to learn about water, and so spent a lot of time meeting with different organizations, learning about how they have dealt with their water crisis in a country very similar to ours. And what's fascinating to me is this little country of Israel has probably figured water out better than almost anywhere on the planet. And one of the things that they can do that we can't, and most places in America can't, is they can account for every drop of water in Israel. And given the characteristics of where we're at, including the second driest state in the country and in a drought and having these challenges with the lake, I think until we get to that point where we know exactly where every drop of water is and where it's going, we're kind of fighting this battle with one arm tied behind our back. And we are investing and making some efforts right now into understanding that, because with that information, we'll be armed with a lot of tools that we probably don't even know we have right now.
So is that suggesting like a bill is coming or something?
Well, we kind of passed a bill already to do that. Representative Miles passed a bill last year that kind of leads us down that direction. But I think for sure, Ben, you will see more legislative action over the coming years to help us understand exactly where our water is, where it's going, how it's being used. And that's why we invested $250 million into secondary water metering. And just that, and what's interesting too is when you give people that information, I think the pricing of water is probably something that will be dealt with at some point. We just don't have the tools right now even to do it, quite frankly, in many cases. But when you, with secondary water in particular, when you show people how much they're using, when you meter it, they reduce consumption by 20 to 30%, just because they're more aware of it. And so I was going to tell you a story about me, but I learned I'm measuring some water at my cabin, which actually does feed into the Bear. That area does, and I had a leak in my system that I didn't know about. And I'm not going to tell you how much water I was wasting and was going down the mountain in the wrong way, but it was a lot of water, and we fixed it. And I just had no idea. So I think there's a lot of people on the Wasatch Front that are using water in ways that they don't even know. So,
speaking of the Bear River, I do want to ask about the Bear River Pipeline project, and specifically, should it even be on paper? Right now, nothing's really happened with it, and so I think I want to start with Lynn. Does it mean anything if it's not really going anywhere?
So, the Bear River Development Act of 1991, I believe,
1991.
Has been basically a mandate for the state of Utah to explore. Essentially, what the terms are would be 220,000 acre feet annually, good to the last drop, for 4 water conservancy districts along the Wasatch Front. I think it's Cache, Weber, Jordan Valley, and
Central Utah?
no,
Oh.
Box Elder, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But the point is that the Bear River provides the lion's share of inflows to Great Salt Lake. I heard the state engineer the other day mention, on average, with good years, the Bear would bring in 1 million acre-feet annually to Great Salt Lake. By comparison with, say, the Weber-Ogden River, which was, I think, 411,000 feet annually. And then the Utah Lake Jordan River, which was more like 550,000 acre-feet annually. So the Bear is the lion's share of water to the lake. And if that is developed and sequestered in a reservoir, and with infrastructure to transfer that water away from Great Salt Lake and the Bear River and Bear River Bay, it goes elsewhere. And one of the kind of compensative remarks to that is, well, it will get there eventually. It just comes in from different parts of the shoreline. But there's so much about Bear River Bay. It's an important bird area. The nature of the water there is fairly fresh. There are fish there that the pelicans, when the American white pelicans come to Great Salt Lake, and we have had the third largest breeding population of American white pelicans in North America, and they would fish in Bear River Bay because of that special condition where more fresh water happens to be coming in there. So for all of the effort that we're talking about doing on behalf of the lake, bringing water into the system through partnerships and through funding and doing it annually, personally, Friends of Great Salt Lake and many others believe that if the Bear River project goes forward, then we've just destroyed the whole multi-annual, multi-billion-dollar effort that we've been putting in to bring water to Great Salt Lake. So it doesn't make sense. And it's been put off, fortunately, but, that's kind of like we've been putting it off, and isn't it nice that we don't need it? But I really would hope that the legislature would revisit that and reevaluate the need and the aspect of, mitigation will be a part of the conversation for Great Salt Lake. But I've also been around long enough to understand that mitigation at every turn can be compromised with something else that needs to just kind of tweak the mitigation that was attributed to a prior project. And I can't bet the ranch on that one. I would be more comfortable and be able to sleep at night if we revisited the Bear River development project and reevaluated its need.
Dr. Null, from your perspective, is it needed? We do have a lot of growth still. You still have to provide water.
We have a lot of growth coming in Utah, so the idea of the Bear River Development Project is to provide water to the Wasatch Front. Like Lynn said, the idea is that it would provide 220,000 acre-feet of yield or firm yield. I would say that that's the most expensive way that we could provide water in this state. If we do things like conservation, water banking, change mineral extraction, do some regulation, all of that would be much, much cheaper, like orders of magnitude cheaper. The price tag for these dams is in the billions. Other dams that have been on the table in California far exceed the price tags of the Bear River Dam. So my guess is that those prices could be a little bit low. The estimates are that if we were to build these dams, and I say these dams because there's a number of alternatives. Some is one dam, some is many dams, so there's a number of iterations and alternatives. If we were to build dams on the Bear River, the projection is that Great Salt Lake would decline from about 8 inches to about 14 inches. Those numbers are a little bit outdated. They were developed when Great Salt Lake was higher, and Great Salt Lake is a bowl shape. So as you get at higher lake levels, you need more water, right, to raise or lower the lake. So we'd probably, actually, the Great Salt Lake would decline a little bit more than those estimates would say. And we can't afford to do that. And Lynn said it very nicely. When, we're spending millions to try to save the lake, why would we counteract that by water development in the most expensive way? It just doesn't make sense.
Speaker Wilson, is it realistic to go forward with this? And while there may be political will, there seems to be practical reality with a finite amount of water.
Well, I think Lynn and Dr. Null have done a great job of kind of sharing the history and all the elements related to this. And I wasn't around when that statute. Yeah, I was like, I think I was in high school when that passed. But and I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So it's been around a long time. But they're right. It was envisioned because we believed that we needed to have water to grow. And so the principle behind that is still relevant. Like we've talked about that already. We want to have water so we can grow, so our kids and grandkids can live around here. But there's a lot of ways to achieve that, and a lot of them have been discussed. And cost is a relevant factor in terms of how and what we do in terms of water development. And I think that's probably why, I know that's why you have not seen it built so far, is there's more economical ways to develop water, if you want to call it that, for people to use. And so, I can't predict the future, but on the trajectory we're on, well, I'll tell you my personal belief, we've got to save the patient first. And the patient's the Great Salt Lake. So let's save the patient first. And once the patient's healthy, let's then talk about what comes next. But that's how I think things should be sequenced. So.
If I may, Ben, Great Salt Lake, the annual contribution that from the values of that system, the lake contributes $1.32 billion annually to Utah's GDP, and that comes from mineral extraction, brine shrimp harvesting, recreation and tourism, and other values as well. It generates a little over 7,000 jobs. So we have an economic generator, which obviously we need to resuscitate so that it can fulfill that expectation and that contribution that it has made. But again, it is inherently a valuable resource that belongs to all of us, and it shows up in monetary worth, but also in a number of other additional values that are very meaningful.
I want to switch gears and talk about future things that are coming up, things to look forward to, things that are being worked on. Dr. Null, you're doing some work right now on conservation measures, some research on that, including this idea of a trading system. Can you please explain to everybody what that even is and how it works?
Yeah, since the Water Banking Act passed in 2020, I, with some of my graduate students, have been really curious about this idea, thinking, well, how much water could we bring to Great Salt Lake if farmers were allowed to sell a portion of their water? So keep their water rights, but lease a portion of their water every year. And I was really curious about this, and so far I've done some back of the envelope calculations. I did them pretty quickly, and I estimated that if we did water banking only in Cache Valley and only in wet years, because I thought, probably farmers aren't going to be selling much water, leasing much water in dry years. So thinking about what I would call wet year water management, that in the wet years we'd be trying to bring lots of water down to Great Salt Lake. People would be more amenable to selling some of their water. And in Cache Valley, I think that had we been doing water banking for the last 30 years, the lake might be about 1 foot to 2.5 feet higher than it is today. So that's not the full solution. It's also only, a fraction of the place. If we extended this to the whole Bear River and the Weber and the Jordan, probably those benefits would increase. Some people would choose to lease some water, some people wouldn't, and that's fine. That would be their decision. Only people who willingly wanted to lease some water who could. But what this says to me is that it's promising. It's a promising idea to keep working towards. It's a promising idea to keep studying. It's a promising idea to talk to farmers and say, hey, would you be open to this? Why or why not? And probably this is a solution to do in addition to conservation and in addition to some other strategies that we have.
Lynn, your group has been doing some work on tracking getting water into the lake and tracking the lake. So can you please tell us a little bit about that?
I'm happy to. Let me see here. Okay. So one of the tools that we have available that we can use as a reference to help get us on our way to translating our commitment to bringing water to the system into, okay, what is it looking like and how are we doing as far as accountability? So there is a tool that I've kind of thought about, okay, so what's a reference that we can all relate to? And we can all relate to when we were done with our tricycles and we wanted to get on the two-wheeler and go forward. And at that time, we also realized that we needed training wheels to make that, make that thing happen. And even though, we were going forward with the training wheels, through time we could change the balance of the training wheels. And eventually we were able to shed the training wheels and move forward. And so this is what I'm suggesting that we consider. And it looks like a stained glass window, but it is a tool called the Great Salt Lake Elevation Matrix that was developed for the 2013 Great Salt Lake Comprehensive Management Plan by the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands in the Department of Natural Resources. And the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, again, has that jurisdictional management responsibility to manage the Great Salt Lake resources up to the meander line, which is a certain elevation. Along the top of the Great Salt Lake Elevation Matrix in the white area are all of these different ecosystem values, like islands, navigation, various bird species, brine shrimp, salinity, and things like that. All of these different access, different parts of the whole of the system and those related resources that state lands has to consider as part of its jurisdictional management responsibility. On the y-axis, the blue on the left side, there is a range of elevations from 4188 to 4213. We are currently down at 4188.8. So we're all practically off the chart. And the colors that you see are values or the viability, if you will, of these ecosystem values on the x-axis along the top and how they're doing. So green is good. And there are sweet spots of elevation where you see a lot of green. And then when you see a transition from green to yellow to orange, that means basically that the conditions are becoming more adverse for those values, those resources. So what I'm suggesting is as we have money, as we identify partnerships, as we identify the water that can come to the system, and we can account for that, we can be sure that it gets from point A to point B being the lake, then we can see how we're doing over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but our goal would be, to look at a range where green persists. And on the elevation matrix, it's like 4195 to 4198. How many people in the room have heard of Dr. Kevin Perry? how many people in the room are aware of the fact that Dr. Kevin Perry has been studying the exposed lake bed? And he has been doing salt crust studies of what is the chemistry of the exposed lake bed, that as it erodes, it creates dust and goes up into the air. And Dr. Perry in his work has said, let's shoot for bringing the lake up 10 feet, which would bring it up to this 4198 value. But again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to cost money, but it should be an annual commitment that we know is going to be a part of doing business as usual. And we can see how we are doing, just like getting on the two-wheeler with the training wheels and moving forward, making progress, and eventually taking those training wheels off and just zooming to the corner, with permission from your mom, of course. But so that's a tool that I'm suggesting would be something we should be talking more about.
Speaker Wilson, I was covering your Great Salt Lake Summit last week, and you are coming up on a legislative session. So what more are you planning? What more are you and your colleagues planning in terms of legislation to benefit the lake?
Thanks, Ben. Just real quick, I just want to make a comment or two about what Lynn just shared. This is more just interesting information, but not only have we kind of almost gone off the chart, but we have two places on the lake right now to monitor its level. One of them is out by Saltaire, and we just breached it, meaning we can't use that anymore because it's now dry. We only have one location left on the lake to measure its elevation. I think we may have to get another one for redundancy purposes, but it's just kind of shocking that that's happening. The other thing that's interesting, just so you know, is we're in the state Department of Natural Resources is in the process of updating this, because when you reset or when you get to this level, we don't know, quite frankly. We're going to have to reevaluate what all these different elements look like at different levels, including what they look like below where we're at now, because you can see we don't have any line of sight to that. So it's a helpful tool. It's always good to know kind of what your target is and what the bogey is, and this shows us where those healthy ranges are, at least where they were in 2013. Within the next a little bit, we'll know what those healthy ranges look like from where we're at. I don't suspect they're going to change much, right? So there's going to be a lot of additional work on the lake. I've already talked about some of it. You'll see more effort around agriculture optimization, at least I hope. As a speaker, I wish I could just wave a magic wand or swing my gavel and make things happen, but there's 103 other people that haven't.
Yeah, but you have a club.
I do have the biggest gavel probably in the country. I do think we're going to make some big investments that way. One thing that I'm excited about, and it's in its infancy. In fact, we just announced it at the Great Salt Lake Summit. And it may seem trivial. I don't think it is. But let me just take you back 20 years. And when the state was dealing with an air quality problem that was not only a problem, but was getting progressively worse. And the state stood up UCARE, which is an organization that was charged with helping coordinate efforts around air quality across the state. And they did everything from giving out grants to doing public messaging and really helping everyone understand what they individually do to help impact our air quality. And while we've still got a ways to go, we've actually reversed that trend. Our air quality is not getting worse now. It's getting better slowly, but it's getting better, in spite of the fact that this population in the valley has increased exponentially since then. Well, we need to do something similar with water. So we announced legislation that I think maybe I'm running, someone's going to be running, maybe me, to create something called Utah Waterways, which will be a public-private partnership So we've got some organizations like Zions Bank and the Larry H. Miller Group and Intermountain Healthcare that are all coming together, putting money in this effort. We'll put state money into it, and it will be kind of a copy and paste of UCare. It will administer grants. It will help coordinate water education across the state. It will have a public-facing element so that individuals have a better understanding of exactly what their behaviors do to help solve or worsen our water problems across the state. And this isn't just focused on the Great Salt Lake. I mean, we've got water issues in Washington County. So we'll have this as a statewide effort. But it just helps us build upon something I mentioned earlier, which is having Utahns have clarity about what they can do and help them, do what they've done so great so far this year. So that's an additional element. I do think you will see measures around measurement and getting more clarity and kind of getting more information about that. And then there's no corner on good ideas. I'm sure we'll have a lot of good ideas come up over the next few months as we get ready for the legislature to start up.
We are coming toward the end of our hour here, but we do want to throw it open for questions. So if you have any questions, I know Heather has a microphone there, and we'll start with you right there in the tie.
I really appreciate all that you've done. My name is Dennis Williams. I live in South Jordan. I made a proposal that was in the Deseret News, which I think could be a tremendous solution. Simply stated, we bring water from Yellowstone Lake. Now, there's a lake called Shoshone Lake, 25 miles from West Thumb. South of that is Lewis Lake, which is about 30 miles from West Thumb. There was flooding in Yellowstone Park last year. There's been flooding down in Missouri in years past. All this water's, western water's going back east. If a pipeline was made between West Thumb and one of those two lakes, the water would flow downhill through Lewis River down to the Snake River, flow all the way down to American Falls Reservoir, and a pipeline from the American Falls Reservoir across Arbor Valley could be a tremendous source for bringing up the water level in the Great Salt Lake. I'm a birder. I love birds. It's not just the Great Salt Lake. It's East Canyon, Echo Reservoir, Rockport, Jordanelle, Deer Creek, Strawberry. The water problem's all over the place. This would bring water from out of the state, and I make that proposal.
Any response? Anybody? Is a pipeline possible? Feasible?
So, just two quick comments. There is going to have to be a regional perspective on our water issues in the state of Utah. We cannot solve it alone. And there are efforts kind of underway to start to facilitate those conversations. They're tricky, though, and I don't know if I should share this or not. But last night, the Lieutenant Governor of Idaho was in town, and I was a future Lieutenant Governor of Idaho, and I was with him. He's a good friend of mine, and I said, Scott, we need some water out of the Snake River to solve our problems. And I think he just about picked me up and threw me out of the room. I mean, water is important to people, and they don't give up their water. And but I think there are ways to work through that, but it's going to take time. And these creative ideas of how all of our water systems in the region are interconnected or could easily be interconnected, you are 100% right. And so, but you've got to have willing partners as part of the challenge. So,
Dr. Null?
Yeah, I just have one more piece to add on that, and I back up that creative solutions are always welcome, and sometimes the people that have been thinking about water the longest, sometimes, we get our blinders on and we don't always think outside the box very well. I will share, though, that in the Salton Sea in Southern California, which is another saline lake, and they had proposed a pipeline from the ocean to bring water to the Salton Sea. And it was just taken off the table, in one, because the price was so high, and two, because they thought it would take so long to build it that they were going to miss the window of opportunity. And so when I hear solutions like pipelines, especially pipelines that take multi-state compacts, that would be a big question in my mind. Could it happen in time? And my guess is that it wouldn't. We need to do things that right now.
You had a question, I believe. Yeah. Oh, we got a microphone. Could someone bring it over?
Well, we have some questions on Zoom.
Oh, I'll get to that. We'll go with you first, and then we'll go to the Zoom questions.
So I have a question about our legislators. So I'm going to address this to you. My question is, are our legislators willing to make some really tough decisions, like perhaps moving from a voluntary conservation request of the public to something that maybe is more mandated and designated by our legislature, and also the idea of granting the lake federal water protections for a minimal lake level, which I think are kind of the tough decisions to make.
Sure. Maybe I'll answer the second question first. So that's an issue that would obviously be taken up not by the state legislature, but by our federal delegation. But I don't, on both of your questions, anything's possible and may need to happen. But I am cut from the cloth that says give people good information, ask them to do the right thing, and most of the time they do. And so I think that's the path we're on right now. But it's something that Lynn pointed out. If all of these measures don't save the patient and get us going in the right direction, I think all options will have to be on the table. And so, but it's a process, and you've got to get consensus or at least enough support to do anything up there. And I see lawmakers make hard decisions all the time, or unpopular decisions all the time. They're not afraid of doing that, but they have to be made for the right reasons. And I will personally tell you, I don't favor going to that immediately until we give people an opportunity to do the right thing on their own. And I have a really strong belief people will. So, but we'll see.
We had some questions coming in online, so.
Hi, yeah, I have two questions that are kind of related, so I'll read both of them, and then maybe the answers will be related. This person said, I'm seriously considering moving because of this issue and this issue alone. I have small children and am concerned that it is irresponsible to raise them in an environment with toxic dust storms. It seems from this conversation that it will take years, perhaps many years, to restore the lake. In the meantime, there are hundreds of miles of exposed lake bed, and my family will be exposed to this toxic pollution. My question for the panel is, would you advise me to move? I love everything about living here, but cannot figure out how dire this situation is in terms of public health right now and in the coming years. And then sort of a secondary question to that is, I'm interested in all these potential measures, but these could take years and the dust may be an issue in the meantime. What, if anything, is being considered for interim measures to stop the lake bed from blowing this toxic dust while these other things hopefully work?
It's interesting because that's a common question that I get. Should I leave Utah? Should I move because of health issues? I also get questions from people out of state who have been offered jobs here, wondering if they should come here because of the health issues. And it's a really tough thing, to give an answer to. Everyone has their own reasons for making the decisions that they do, and they have to consider those values that provide the meaning to their health and their family and their future. So I respect that, and I don't give people an answer. I do tell them, though, that I came to Utah in 1972 from New Jersey, the Garden State. And I'm staying. I'm committed. But maybe I should be committed. But the second question, I don't know. It's a hard one.
I wish I knew where they were thinking of moving to. That would help answer the question, I think. I guess I would just say that I understand the concern about the dust. We know that some places, like Farmington Bay, for example, are bigger sources of dust. And so those are places that, we should think about wetting as soon as we can. The more water we get into the lake, the dust concerns will start to fade away. That first foot is really important. The last foot gets less of a benefit. But like Lynn said, I think it's a concern, and I understand why people are concerned, and I'm concerned too.
We've got time for maybe one last question. I'll go with you.
I feel bad. Mine is the last question. It's probably not the best question out there. It's kind of a two-part question. How much lower is it projected to get? And when will be too late? Next year, is it going to be worse? And then are we going to be saying, oh man, I don't know?
I'm going to go to our experts. Any of you, what's the point of no return?
I mean, this is a complicated answer because we have climate change happening where we expect our atmosphere it's going to be warmer, so we know that that's going to have a drying effect. Precipitation is really uncertain. It could be a little bit wetter. But with the warmer climate, we would expect that maybe to balance each other out. I think if we don't do anything, if we just stay the course, I think the lake's going to dry out. It's just a matter of when. Is it going to happen in 20 years or 40 years? So in that way, the answer is crystal clear. We need to do something. And not, I would say the question of like when exactly will the lake dry out, I'm hoping is the wrong question. And we should, and I'm not saying that was a bad question, I'm just saying that hopefully we can take this as a warning sign and know we need to make changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we're learning from other systems, Owens Lake, Mono Lake. But I keep going back to the Bear River water development. As far as something that's kind of, in-house, close to home, the hood, and revisiting that and really evaluating the impacts that would come from that on what we're trying to do to resuscitate the patient.
Speaker? Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't think we, of course, know the answer to that completely. It just depends on what happens with our weather cycles over the next couple of years. It wouldn't be surprising, obviously, given what's happening and how dry we've been, to see the lake continue to drop for a number of years, a few more years at least. But we could also immediately go into a wet cycle, which could solve the problem in the short term. But there is a difference between, and we talked about this last week at the Great Salt Lake Summit, there's a difference between wet and dry cycles and the trend. And we are kind of got the worst of both right now. We're in a long dry cycle, and the trend, even if you were to factor in a wet cycle coming soon, the trend is still down in terms of water that we're getting into the lake and into the state. So we've got to factor all of those things in. It just places more importance on continuing to do the things we're doing around these investments, around secondary water metering, agriculture optimization, all those things that will get water relatively soon into the lake and into the system. But there is a lag, unfortunately, from when we make those decisions and those investments to when they show up in terms of water in the Great Salt Lake. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but sometimes that's in years that takes. So we have to be realistic about how this is all going to play out. But there's some real concerns. The salinity levels of the Great Salt Lake right now are getting higher and higher as you have less water in the lake. That could cause, and Lynn could tell you more about this than me, but that could cause some really dire consequences if that continues to elevate. There's some things we can do to help offset that, but we've got to pay really close attention to that. Because that, when we talk about our migratory bird population, that in and of itself is just be catastrophic. Mm-hmm. So I can't be the last thing I say. It's catastrophic. So, but we're going to figure it out. So,
all right, let's give we're running out of time, unfortunately, but let's give everybody a round of applause. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight was a part of the Great Salt Lake Collaborative's mission to inform and educate people about the lake. Our next event will take place November 9th at the Anderson Foothill Branch. KCPW's Roger McDonough is going to moderate a discussion on the lake's ecology and what these changes mean for us. And of course, be sure to be watching your local news sources for a series of stories on Nevada's water conservation measures, whether those would apply here in Utah. Those are going to air next month. Meantime, you can visit greatsaltlakenews.org for more on a recent trip that was taken to California and the warning of dried up lake beds in that state. And on your way out, I would say please sign up for the Collaborative's newsletter. You can get links to a lot of our reporting on issues impacting the lake and other information about ways to help the Great Salt Lake. Also, be sure to pick up stickers and pins because everybody likes swag.
And
so
temporary
thank you for
tattoos.
being here tonight, whether in person or by Zoom. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.